Today we're inside a 2024 Polestar 2 taking a look at the latest Polestar infotainment software. The software in the upcoming Polestar 3 is going to be a little bit different, but a lot of the basics carry over. And this software is what you're going to find available eventually in a number of different Volvo models. Polestar is going first as far as most software tweaks and software upgrades. Volvo is then carrying on a little bit later. Let's just take a deeper dive into the system functions. So up here we have things like the camera interface, 360-degree camera, or you can zoom in on individual camera readouts. We then have an option for vehicle settings. This is as close as you'll get to drive mode settings effectively. Here we have steering feel, light, standard, firm, one pedal drive modes. Remember, this has blended braking, so this is adjusting you between no throttle liftoff regen braking, so just coasting, all the way down to pretty aggressive one-pedal driving, where you don't have to use the brake pedal at all, and then low is somewhere between worlds. You can then adjust whether the vehicle will creep when you take your foot off the brake pedal like an ICE vehicle will, or whether you don't want that to happen. The closest thing we get to sport mode is by putting the electronic stability control in sport mode, but it's not really quite the same thing versus what we see in other vehicles out there. Up here we have the ability to change some of the driver assistance functions. For instance, if I click on this one, you can choose between regular cruise control and adaptive cruise control, different settings available for those various different items. You can also slide side to side for some of those various options. One really cool thing is that in addition to changing the charge limit of the battery, that's pretty normal, you can also adjust the charge rate of the battery all the way 1 amp by 1 amp all the way up here to a maximum of 48 amps, which is the 11 kilowatt onboard onboard charger in this vehicle. Most vehicles out there just allow you to choose high and low when on 120 volts, and they don't allow you to fiddle with 240 volt charging at all. That is a really interesting option. Of course, we also get charge scheduling down there as well. Over here on the more option, we get things like vehicle status. This is basically just, is the tire pressure good and when's your next service, to the way the locks behave, interior ambient lighting. You can see you can change the intensity of the ambient lighting, which is happening right there behind the screen. You can also adjust the way the mirrors function, whether you want them to turn down when you're in reverse. That sort of function is all done here. This is also where you will find the option to turn off the car. Otherwise, it's going to turn on when you put your foot on the brake pedal and put it in drive, and it's going to turn off when you put it in park and then leave the vehicle. Up here, we have direct access to various apps that are built into the system. So Maps, YouTube, the performance page, it's just a G meter here. I'm actually surprised you don't get a few more performance options, but hopefully it will expand over time. If you have the performance package, then you get this launch control option right here. So you can choose where it wants to access the location. So you can say, well, using the app, sure, why not? This system has essentially the same sort of tracking controls you'd find on an Android phone, since this is running Android, of course. Now, if you're running the launch control thing, then you do have a 0 to 60 timer. If you don't have the performance pack, then you just get the G meter in that screen. Back over here, we also have the ability to have other apps load in. For instance, the press drive routing is right there. That's kind of a cool thing. Over here, we have direct access to CarPlay, so you can get back to your CarPlay interface pretty easily. On this side, we have our media interface, Sirius XM. That's something that didn't happen at Polestar up front, but is now here. We have the Bluetooth media player, Spotify, built-in, etc. The Google Assistant. One big change here is this range assistant. It has definitely now given us better information as far as what the drivetrain is using energy-wise. Your projected mileage, your instant consumption right there, how your driving is going. So my driving style apparently is low consumption, so is my speed, but the climate control is definitely using a bit more oomph. I can solve that though by moving over to Eco Climate, and that's going to drop down. If I click this button over here, you can see my consumption over time. So over the last 20 miles, been 27.6 kilowatt hours per 100 miles. I don't prefer that method of displaying fuel economy. I do prefer miles per kilowatt hour, but it's still pretty handy. Since we're doing a lot of idling and photo shooting with this vehicle, you can see climate control has been using 50% of the energy. Then I can see consumption over 100 miles. You can see that average is much higher, 32 kilowatt hours for 100 miles, just because of the driving that we've been doing testing the vehicle out. This has been pretty efficient. Right now I am in the single motor model. Over here I can hit this little star button, and then I can choose how the range is being displayed in the instrument cluster, whether I want the standard range calculation, which basically just goes on the certified numbers for the vehicle, basically EPA numbers, or whether I want the vehicle to give me an adaptive projected distance based on the way that I've been driving. Lots of preferences out there as far as how you want to do that. I don't know if one way is better than the other, but this does give you the option of both of those. If I hit this P button up here, that is not Park or Polestar, that is actually the profile selection there, and right now you can see the profile right there is the Polestar profile in the vehicle. Sorry, the admin profile. If I pull this option down, that's where we find things like system messages from the vehicle to us. If I click this button down here, much like an Android tablet, we get a home screen. It looks very much like that square screen, but there are a few differences. This pulls up the most recently used app in each of these quadrants. So CarPlay is going to be right down there. But if I click this home button, you notice Range Assistant is up here rather than, say, the air quality option there. And if I go down here again, then you'll see air quality is right there, and it gives you inside and outside air quality. Of course, we get the Sirius XM widget down there in that lower corner. At the bottom of the screen, we get the controls for the heated and ventilated seats, the heated steering wheel, etc. We also get access to the climate control slider for the temperature. You can ask the Google Assistant for a wide variety of these functions. Over here, we have more of the climate control settings. So the main climate readout for auto mode, parking, whether you want the preconditioning to start, the air purification to start, other settings for the climate control, like the driver and front passenger seat heating settings, whether you want those to be automatic and whether you want to use the auto air quality sensor at all. As far as the Google Assistant goes, you can either use that button right there, or you can use the button on the steering wheel if you want to. You can see it's doing the voice recognition there, so let's go ahead and give this a whirl. Set the climate control to 70 degrees. You can see it actually is pretty responsive as far as reading that out, as far as what it thought you said. So it's really pretty snappy as far as that translation there. And then, of course, it set the climate control to 70 degrees. Down here at the bottom, we have a little gear icon taking us over to various different system settings. So things like the display brightness, instrument panel settings, sound profiles, the sound experiences, the equalizers, etc. We can go ahead and turn on the surround sound there. You can adjust your surround optimization, things like that. There are now more settings in here than there were in the first version of the Polestar software, so they've definitely been working on some of those options right there. Next to that settings icon, we logically have an App Store icon, so you can go into the App Store and you can download all sorts of apps to the system. For instance, if you want the ChargePoint app, that's handy. If you want Waze navigation, you can just install that natively in the system rather than operating that on your cell phone. So you don't have to have your cell phone connected if you don't want to. This gives you that option. Definitely a really handy feature because we don't find that in a lot of EVs out there. General Motors is actually running away from CarPlay integration. We don't have this level of app integration and app choice in some of the leaders in the EV segment. So for instance, Tesla does have a decent number of apps on board, but we don't have the ability to do Waze in that system. And of course, we don't have the ability to do Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. You can also download some more apps for doing things while you're parked and charging. So the buggy racing, games, Tubi, things like that. We have different radio apps, Amazon Music, YouTube Music, Open Radio, etc. And it's not just those options, there are actually more options in there as well. Not quite as many games as I had expected to find, but you'll notice that there are a reasonable number of train games, solitaire games, road tripping games. I have no idea what My Talking Tom Friends is, but hey, if you want to find that out, you can go into the App Store and then you can download yourself that app. Going back to the home screen, Waze is downloading and installing now. Let's go ahead and see what that looks like. Now that Waze has installed itself, you'll notice it's up here with the map application. I can just go ahead and click on that Waze icon and it's going to load Waze just like it would operate on your phone. Let's go ahead and see what that looks like. Obviously, Waze is going to want to try and get you to sign into the application. We have to authorize its use of the location settings in the vehicle, and then we get a QR code that you have to then continue to set up using your smartphone. That setup on your smartphone is actually pretty easy. You just say, yep, it's me, and the car will log you in. Now, interesting twist, you can only use Waze on one device at a time. So when you first load this, if you have Waze enabled on your phone, it's going to say you have to close Waze because it can only be on one device. Halcyon, a Cherry Creek hotel. With Waze enabled over here on the instrument cluster, you don't get a map display. You actually just get a blank screen. That's because on the instrument cluster, you have the choice of either Apple Maps or Google Maps. None of these other mapping interfaces will do their thing. So if I'm over here in this mapping interface, for instance, the native Google mapping interface, and I just say I want to go to Boulder Reservoir, wherever that is, right there, it tells me obviously 41% on arrival, 29% on return. It's calculating both directions, and then it's going to give me turn-by-turn directions and a moving map display over here in the instrument cluster. It's also going to talk to me there a bit. So if I cancel this one, however, let's go ahead and cancel that route, and then we will go back to the home screen, go to Apple CarPlay. We will then go to the Apple Maps option here, take a look at our recent destinations, go back to that same place, hit the go button. Now you'll notice that this has now switched over to Apple Maps in this display. So it is kind of interesting that even though we do have the native Waze mapping there, it doesn't translate over to that instrument cluster. Now, as far as controlling the system, we have physical controls over here on the steering wheel, track forward, backward, volume up, down, also a voice command button. And then for that instrument cluster up there, this little button toggles between the two different looks, either map or no map. Those are essentially the only looks that you get in this system, one way or the other. And then you can also pull up a trip computer readout where you see your recent consumption, and you do that with this round button right there in the middle. Other controls for the system are right down here in the middle where we have a power volume knob, sort of play pause. That knob rotates around for volume. We then have some physical buttons for things like the defroster, defogger, and then the hazard lights right there. So there we go. That's our look at the latest Polestar infotainment software. Be sure and let me know what you think of all that down there in the comment section below. And if you haven't seen the complete video on the new 2024 Polestar, that should be coming out a few days after this video. So be sure and check that out if you haven't already done so. See all of you next week.